Welcome to Patrick's Scale Studio. My name's Patrick and I'll be your host. So this would be build video 2 of USS Missouri in 1/350th scale by Verifier. And in this episode we are going to be focusing on getting all of the hull prepared and ready for priming and painting. So we've got some seams we've got to sand off and check back in, and we've got some sink marks we're going to have to tackle. Just kind of barely make them out there. Let's see. And then we've got some molding lines here because I believe this is slide molded. So with that, let's go ahead and get started here. As you can see, I've already started kind of working on this. I wanted to get a feel for Verifier's plastic. And for the most part, we're just going to start off with a regular sanding stick. And don't worry, I am not going to bore you with the entire sanding process here. But something to note here is there will be some holes that are going to have to be filled as we go through this. Just for the simple fact that the halves are lined up pretty nicely, but the cement didn't completely fill it in with the molten plastic after it dissolved it. So we do have a couple of holes here and there. No amount of sanding is going to get like this little area right here. You just kind of barely make out that one tiny little shiny spot. Otherwise, I'd leave a big wide dimple in the bottom of the ship there. So go ahead and work on getting this all sanded out here, and we are going to go progressively finer here as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and get most of this seam line dealt with a coarse sanding stick, and we'll move on to that. Okay, so I've gotten a good portion of that seam sanded down roughly. And you'll notice back here, not really a whole lot I could get in there and do a good sanding efficiently, and then have to do it with finer and finer and finer grades. And in the end, yeah, I get it. No one's really going to see in there, but just for my self-satisfaction, I like to make sure that it's gone. So what I did instead was cut a strip of pretty thin plastic card. And I want to say this is maybe 10.1 millimeters. I said 10, I'm not sure why, but 0.1 millimeters I think is about the thickness. Maybe it's thicker than that. I don't really know. It looked thin enough, but not so thin that it would degrade with the Tamiya cement underneath it. So I slopped down some thick Tamiya cement, slid it in there, and then hit up the corners with some extra thin, and then also hit the ends with some extra thin. And when it gets cured up, just should be able to take a very flat sanding device like a stick or something like that, and just go over it up here where it'll blend into the hole, and then down here I will get these edges feathered out. So really hoping that that'll take care of that particular part of the join seam. So the next thing I've done here is I took a sanding sponge and I just kind of went over like this where those dimples were in the plastic, and I roughed them up specifically for the purpose of being able to hold CA. So I'm going to take some CA, and there's going to be probably a couple applications here as we go. I'm just going to take some CA though and going to dab it over. Doesn't have to be perfect. For the most part, the sanding portion of the hole in these areas, in these sink marks, is just so it holds on to the CA better. As adhesives and CA and anything like that, or maybe like an epoxy, definitely holds together better on a part when you've got the part slightly keyed. like with some rough sanding grooves. No real artistry or anything here. Mainly the goal is just to get this to fill in those sink marks. Alright, so this is going to do is going to cure. The cement on the plastic card is going to cure. And in the meantime, I can continue working on other parts of the seam right here in order to get that under control while this stuff cures up. Alright, so one of the last things, and yes, the CA is still drying, and the cement here is still drying, but one of the last things in preparation for getting this primed and painted is getting rid of the mold seams here. So again, just the only two I really found were right here, and there's some back here, but they were really just kind of local to this area right here, and will be sanded away and dealt with when we go ahead and tackle getting this plate of plastic card feathered out properly. So I'm just going to take a greater 20 grit sanding sponge and just kind of start going over these. And they come out easy enough. And just like everywhere else where we're going to be sanding, we will go back with varying grades of grit and get these sanding marks smoothed out properly. So a little bit of finesse is required in some of the areas here where those are. But they're pretty easy all in all to deal with. And just take care that you're not mistaking those lines with the plating lines here that are actually purposely molded into the hole. So I'll go ahead and start working on those here while I'm still waiting on everything else to finish curing. Alright, everything has dried and cured overnight. I've already tested out this front sink mark here where the CA was applied, just using a sanding stick. And pretty much this is pretty easy to do here. What we're really doing is taking the sanding stick, and I like to start with the rougher grit side of that and trying to lay it flat but not putting pressure on the back side of it here. And just going over where that CA is. And at first it kind of feels a little grippy, and that's okay. But again, trying to keep it flat to the hull, because what we don't want to do, what I don't want to do is sand away plastic. I just want to sand away at the CA glue. And over time I've learned that just letting the CA cure on its own without without something to speed up that process, like a what is this stuff, you know, like an instant accelerator or anything like that, the CA has less of a chance of developing air bubbles or air pockets and things like that. So if you've ever kind of played around with CA glue, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments from people I know that are watching this, you know, I've gotten a bad cut or something like that and use a little CA glue to kind of seal it up and use a little bit of accelerator, you can actually feel the chemical reaction and it gets hot. And I think that is what generates the air pockets and bubbles. So, where I've been sanding it right now, it's starting to feel nice and flat. There's just a touch of a ridge right here, but just a little bit more sanding in that area will refine that. again, the goal here is just to make that sink mark disappear when we get around to putting primer on here. So that's much better. You can go about it different angles, what have you, but again, the key is to try to make sure, maintain your sanding stick flat against the bottom of the hull here. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and knock out the rest of these off camera. Okay, all of the sink marks with the CA glue filling have been roughly sanded. I'll need some finer tune sanding here after everything else is complete, but I really want to knock out the shape and get that straightened out first. So our next, and by the way, if you don't have one of these and you like your sanding sticks, absolutely get one. It is clutch for clearing out the sanding debris from your sanding stick. But I was about to mention here, we're going to go ahead and start working on this right here. And again, just similar to these CA filled sink marks, we're going to try to keep our sanding stick up against the hull with no pressure on the back. We just want the pressure where the white plastic card is. And what we're going to do is attempt to sand this down so that it is flush with the bottom of the hull here, and it feathers nicely into that channel back there between where the propeller shafts go. So just going to again use a rough side of my sanding stick. So we are just going to get this roughly into shape before we go into any finer grades of sandpaper or sanding sponges or what have you. And I'll know I'm there when I start to see these shiny areas where the extra thin cement was, when I start to see those disappear. So I'm not boring you to death with sanding. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of this bit off camera. Be right back. Wow, the arm got quite the workout here, but this right there is, for the most part, sanded about as smooth as it's going to get. We're going to need a little bit of filler for a couple little spots here, and then a little bit of fine tuning with a much finer grit of sanding. But all in all, I'm very happy with how that came out. That feathers in beautifully, and now I don't have to worry about getting into the seam here between where the two propellers and the shafts would be. So that brings us to the last bit of major, I wouldn't say alterations, but working on getting this in good shape, and that is the bit of that plastic back here. So again, we're going to use a sanding stick, and because it's not really flat back here, can't really tell you to keep it as flat as you can to the hole. But one thing I'm going to try to avoid doing is running into this right here with a rough grit, because that could, this is pretty thin, and that could ruin that, and I don't want to have to go back and repair that. So go ahead and using this, I'm going to go ahead and work on getting this feathered out, so it looks like it is part of the kit after a little bit of painting and priming versus anything that I had to go back in and do. So I'm going to take care of this off camera. We'll touch base here when I've got that sanded into shape. So for the most part, this is completed here. Just need some finer blending with finer grits of sanding medium here. One thing that I did find odd, this could have been my own screw up, or it could just be a little bit of warpage on the kit parts, but when I glue these whole halves together, this right here is perfectly even. No step or anything here on that. I'll point to that real quick. But back here, there is a step. So I'm going to sand, you'll notice there's a little bit more of a sanding area on the port side of this hull than on the starboard side. So I'm going to do a little bit more sanding here, see if I can kind of lessen this step a little bit. And then I'm going to have to fill some of these pipe marks with a little bit more CA, let that cure up, and then I should be able to start doing some finer sanding here to get this into good shape. By the end of the video, I would like to have most of this covered in primer just to see you know, where any spots that need more attention are. But it's just good primer is a good way of double checking our work on sanding, sink marks, any kind of gaps or anything like that that need filling. So I'm going to go ahead and get to work a little bit more on this and revisit here when we get that back to a happier spot. It's not 100% dry, but Mr. Surfacer 1000 went down, and I'm happy to say that it looks good. Perfect? Not by far, but it looks good. I don't typically try to strive for perfection because I don't have a shrink ray that I can take the real USS Missouri and shrink it down to 1/350th scale, but all in all, I'm very happy with how it looks. So I think our next, let me put this down here, I think our next video is going to be putting down some whole red on this, getting that kind of weathered up, taping it off, putting on the boot strap, and then putting on the bluish gray. I'll have to do a little research to figure out what the color is and what looks right to me, but I think that's going to be our next video here, along with also getting on propeller shafts or rudders or what have you, anything that we need to go on here prior to doing so. So until that time, stay safe and happy modeling.